Welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. This is our weekly Q&A show. Get your questions into us in the comments below this very show. And of course you can email them in to the email address at the bottom of the screen there. Just use the hashtag AskGMBNTech so we can find them amongst all the other cool stuff you keep sending us. Okay, first up this week is from Quarantine Vaseline. I wish someone to explain to me how could a single leg like a lefty provide more strength, especially on bumps and holes, than a conventional double-legged fork. I mean, the shock is coming from the wheel and absorbing its shock absorber, but only on one side of the wheel. Cannondale websites use the fact that many planes have this configuration. It works on a plane, it should work on a bike. But the only one detail they missed is those planes have double wheels on a single leg fork. So the forces keep being balanced, and if it's strong, why isn't there a downhill version? P.S. I want to upgrade my fork, but until I get a reply, I will never get a lefty. All right, well, so there's quite a lot in here. Okay, so firstly, they're not necessarily stronger as stuff, but for what they are, they're potentially stiffer. So the fork design actually internally has 4 leg sides and 88 needle bearings across that. So it spreads the load, so torsionally, it's like the stiffest thing in the world, really. It's unbelievably stiff. As for the plain leg thing, well, look at cars, for example. Look at how the wheels are mounted on cars. It's technically the same thing. And if you look on screen now, you'll see what is called the oleo strut. And this is design used in aircraft undercarriage design, which is what Cannondale have been talking about. And that particular example I found on Google Images looks pretty much like a odd looking Cannondale lefty fork to me. So that theory goes out the window because it does work and it is proven in that circumstance. However, we are aware that it is different on a bicycle because it's got to be built a lot lighter, which is why, getting to your question about the downhill fork, there probably hasn't been a downhill specific one because it'd have to be overbuilt monumentally to be able to be treated with that much abuse constantly. However, the original lefty design actually came from a telescopic downhill fork which had those 4-sided legs on the inside of both legs of the fork. It's called the Moto 120. And rumour has it amongst the Cannondale sort of internal guys that some of the mechanics were messing around with one of the legs that had a leg off the bike, and they were just prattling around in the car park and they were like, well, this thing's nearly stiff enough to ride as it is, so they did a bit of a bodge and ended up making the lefty off the back of it as they realised the chassis was that stiff that it didn't actually need a secondary leg to operate. Of course, it's very different with downhill forks because you've got to fit all of the gubbins inside the fork. Gubbins, of course, is the highly technical name for the shim stacks for the compression and rebound damping, as well as the coil or air spring, depending on what's inside there. Of course, if you've got 2 legs on a regular fork, you can balance this out, but you can have one leg that's just dedicated to being a spring and the other leg just dedicated to being damping. With a lefty, it's a bit trickier because you've got to fit everything into one leg. And you think how much work a downhill fork does, it's probably just not that practical to make one with all that stuff in it, regardless of the strength aspect. So if you're thinking of buying one, I'd have no qualms. Go and buy one. They're expensive though. All right, so next question's from Andrew Jackson. Howdy Doddy, loving a tech show, mate. Recently bought some Hope Pro 4 rear hub because I loved the sound, but compared to my mate's one, it's noticeably much quieter. Would greatly appreciate any info or advice as to why. I'm taking a guess that your friend's one has been ridden a bit longer than yours, in which case the oil on the inside or the very light grease that they might use will have burnt its way off, or at least sort of reduced the amount they're actually sitting on the pulls. So on the inside of a Hope hub, there are actually pulls that bounce up and down, and that is effectively what that noise is you're hearing. Now you can make your bike louder by taking the free hub body off the bike, cleaning it all and using a super light oil. Now Mavic and a few other companies make a dedicated oil especially for those pulls because they believe that it should have the lightest oil action in order to not hinder the movement of them, and it makes for a really positive click clunk as they locate onto the ratchets. Of course, you don't want to be using a thick grease in there because if they congeal the pulls and they stick down, the ratchet's actually not going to work, so you'll still be freewheeling. It will be pretty much silent, but they're not actually going to flick back onto the teeth and actually grip, so you don't want to be doing that. So if you want to clean it out, then it will be noisier is what you're looking for, but make sure you look after it. This one's a bit puzzling. So this is from Stefan Gotzen. Hi guys, hope you can help me with your knowledge and experience since my local bike shop haven't. I'm experiencing some play on the last 3 gears, so the biggest ones on a cassette, with a Shimano SLX M7000 11-speed cassette. Initially I thought the lock ring on the cassette wasn't tightened correctly, but after tightening it, I'm still getting some rattling. It's really annoying, especially whilst climbing. Be nice if you guys can help me out here. The only thing I can think of, as you've already said it is tight, is that one of those spacers might not be the original spacer, because you could take those cassettes apart and there'd be a spacer between every sort of set of sprockets there. And if it's just slightly thinner, then it's never actually going to sandwich the lock ring up against it all, and there will be very slight movement, which you're going to notice at the big end there, or perhaps even at the small end when things get a bit rough out on the trail. Now also on some cassette bodies, there's a tiny thin washer or spacer that goes on the far outside, so the other side, the spoke side of the top sprocket there. Now if that is not present, that will be your problem, and it can be hard to track down because the rest of the cassette looks like it's all still in one piece and all the parts are there. So have a check of that, and also when you take your cassette off, check if the actual body itself is loose, because sometimes you can actually think it's a cassette, but it's actually the body that the cassette is mounted to. In which case, depending on which hub you've got, you have to tighten that internally, which usually means taking an axle system out of the hub and putting a whacking grit Allen key in the end. It can often be as big as a 12 or sometimes like a 14 or 16 in there, depending on the hub. So check that out, and hopefully that will be your problem. As with all sort of gear-based problems, you've got to check a few other things as well, just to be sure. Check the jockey and guide wheels, make sure that they're securely tightened. Check the rear derailleur, how it tightens to the actual hanger, and check how the hanger tightens to the frame, and hopefully you will find your problem. Okay, next up is a rear derailleur related question from Sinstrel Bat. It says, what's a clutch on a derailleur? Do all or most of them have them? Okay, so a clutch on a derailleur, if I just put the lock on this one here without breaking my fingers, in this order. The clutch is housed in this part of the derailleur, and its job is to provide additional resistance onto the drivetrain. In other words, to add more tension to the chain so it doesn't flap around too much. Now on this particular one, I mean, you can adjust them on some of the SRAM ones, but really it's designed to be an inclusive unit that's not adjustable, whereas on the Shimano ones there's a lever on the outside to turn it on and off. And the reason for turning it on and off is so that you can easily remove your wheel from the bike. If the clutch is on, you've got to fight the resistance of that derailleur in order to release the tension on the chain to drop the wheel out. On the SRAM ones, they have this little clever locking system. If I just unlock it here, you'll see it will pop back again the other way. Very strong spring on those. That's essentially what it is. Now back in the day before that happened, your chain would slap around wildly. You'd often lose your chain, which led to the whole era of chain guides on the front of the bike in order to do anything possible to keep the chain gripping onto the chain ring at the front. If you have a look on the screen now, it's a Bullet Brothers chain tensioner, and it's literally an alloy arm that used to hang off your quick release nut on the rear. It's sent straight at the back of the bike and have a big powerful spring that would mount to the bottom cage by the bottom guide wheel there, and it effectively did the same job, pulling as much tension on the bottom part of the chain in order to help stop unraveling on the chain rings. So it's just a modern day version of that, and it's getting increasingly more common to see it on more budget bikes now, so I think there will be a time where you'll see it on most bikes, especially on those running one by. Okay, next question is from Tom Hicks. What are the best shoes for flat pedal riders? I live in the UK, so conditions can get muddy and also dry at times. Okay, so I don't necessarily think there is a best flat pedal shoe. It is very much a personal preference thing, because they feel very different in use. They each have different characteristics. Okay, so if you have a look on screen now, you'll see the Shimano GR9. Now this one's got a lace flap, so it protects against wet and sort of stuff getting into the shoe initially. That's a great design for UK riders like yourself. The upper has got light padding, so it doesn't absorb that much moisture and water, which is great because when you're riding on those really sodden days, your shoes aren't going to feel like big breeze blocks on your feet, and it also means that they do dry out quicker. Now the sole on it's got Michelin rubber on there, so it's not quite as grippy as the Stealth rubber used by 510. However, it is excellent and very predictable on the pedals. The great value too. They also make some cheaper models. I forget the name of them off the top of my head, but they don't have the flap, but they revolve on the same sort of fit and the same protection and the same sole. So definitely worth checking out the Shimano shoes. Next up on the screen is the 510 Freerider EPS High. Now I use this shoe and it's got a Freerider Stealth sole on there, which isn't quite as aggressive as some of the other 510 shoes, but I find it works excellently on flat pedals, especially on the Crank Brothers pedals that we use here at GMBN. Now it's insulated, the uppers, so also very good for the UK, and there are leather uppers on there as well, but there's no flap or anything, so the water still will get in after a while, but your feet will remain warm. The sole, as I just mentioned, is the Stealth S1, so it's very grippy, but not quite as grippy as the classic Impacts. Next up, have a look on the screen, is the Freerider Element. So I was a huge fan of the VXIs. They're super light, though the soles didn't seem to last the longest. But the Element is probably the next best option, which is that one. And finally, Blake's choice at the moment is the Specialised 2FO Flat, and that's the latest version. Now, it's not the grippiest shoe in the world on the pedal, but I think Blake really likes how compact it is. It's very much like a skate shoe on your foot. And I think what Blake really likes as well, because he's a bit of a free rider dude, he likes to like swing the bike around, and when he's doing like 1 foot tables and that, he likes to lay the bike over sideways, which actually involves having to move his foot position on the pedal. And of course, when you're using stuff like 510, it's nearly impossible sometimes because some of the soles are so grippy that once on you can barely move your foot. So that is a factor for you. And just one last one to have a look at. Check out now, this is a gyro riddance. So this is a 3/4 shoe, got a bit more inside ankle protection. It's got a life saving, just a strap around the top there for also securing the ankle a bit. It's got the latest version of the Vibram rubber sole on there. The previous one was grippy, but this one apparently is a lot grippier. Personally, I just think it looks like a really good shoe. I always like that inside ankle protection, especially on a flat pedal shoe, because you're more prone to moving your feet around and bashing the ankle bone on your cranks or your frame. Okay, next one is from Benji about a bit of a niche part of mountain biking. So he says, Doddy, why don't you talk more about trials bikes? I've got a street trials bike from Yaba. On the back of it, I have a freewheel mounted to a fixed hub. The freewheel is from 2007, and I'm not sure if it's still safe. I like it because the hub's really wide, so the wheel is really strong. Should I buy a Hope Trials hub or get a new freewheel? Alright Benji, so well, first up, trials is quite niche. In the earlier days where it was more or less doing trials on a mountain bike, which is what Martin Ashton used to do all the time, of course, with Martin Hawes. There were two real big names in the sport, and they were alongside Hans Ray, very famous for doing trials on mountain bikes. And the thing that's so cool about that was, to the regular person that wasn't into trials, you could suddenly understand how hard and difficult it was to do those sort of skills on a conventional bicycle, as opposed to a dedicated 20-inch stock trials bike, which you use in observed trials. Now, we do love trials bikes, but because it's so niche now, the dedicated trials bikes are so far removed that you can't do anything else on them really other than trials. You know, we like to try and be as broad as we can with mountain biking, and of course we will try and do some more with trials. I'm quite a big fan. I used to do a bit of street trials. I used to copy Martin Ashton when I was younger. In fact, I had a Cannondale and you know, had a Bash Guard and all that sort of stuff, Magura HS33 race lines. Loved it, but again, kind of went out of it a bit and went back towards the off-road stuff. So we will pick that up. But I did speak to Martin because he knew the exact bike, so I had to ask him about this. So Martin says, assuming we're talking about the right model, the freewheel is located on the cranks, the rear sprocket is fixed on the hub. And the reason for that basically is to get the gear ratio as low as possible and the ground clearance as high as possible, so you can get over stuff, which some people will obviously know. But to convert that, you're going to need a new hub or a wheel, new cranks and a chain ring, and probably a chain too, which is really expensive. Now, the Hope hub would mean a faster pickup and potentially is more reliable, but is at a huge cost. So that is entirely up to you. So there are performance benefits to be had from doing it, but got to spend a bit of dosharuli to do it. So Martin also said, check out tartybikes.co.uk. He says that is pretty much the resource he goes to for trial stuff now. So check that one out, it's on the screen. So there we go, there's another Ask GMBN Tech clinic in the bag. If you've got any questions, you've got any stuff you want featured in that show, get them in those comments below and we'll pick that one up with you. And of course you can email them in to the regular email address with the hashtag AskGMBNTech. For a couple more really cool videos, click down here if you want to win one of 5 POC helmets. They're the new ones with the spin technology inside them. And if you want to get perfect, accurate shifting, click down there. As always, click on the round globe to subscribe to the channel. And if you like asking questions about technical stuff, give us a thumbs up.